That's one of the things that has bothered me the most about this election cycle. And I have so many other questions, but we're leading right into this because one of the reasons I have been pushing as hard as I can in this platform is because it's so clear to me how people use the language of our struggle as African Americans, and they use what you call the racial injury of someone being killed by a police officer or some type of injustice. They use that language as though they have some type of identification with every black person. However, it's used almost as a cover to protect the status quo, for which they tremendously benefit to the detriment of their brothers, their sisters, their cousins who are still stuck needing $15 an hour. How do you, in this world where you see this paradigm, you're fully aware of it, and you know some of your colleagues or some of your associates and some people that I admire are really using this language, but the language of civil rights, the language of oppression, and the language of I think I heard you say this even with Barack Obama, using the language of biblical references to Exodus, using that as a means of still protecting the neoliberal economic paradigm that is hurting us in the exact opposite way that they're using the racial language and the religious language. Just talk about that a little bit more, because that's one of those things that has been bugging the hell out of me.
Yeah, I mean, we just got to call it. We just got to tell the truth and be courageous and not assume that because folk are black, that by definition we all have the same politics. So many ways, Brother Benjamin, the way in which some people approach black communities is that they almost think that we're pre-political. That's all you got to do is invoke something around black people, and that we all just kind of get in line and we have the same interests. We vote the same way. We think the same way, like some homogeneous blob or something. And instead of that, we need to understand that, you have some black folk who are, we run the spectrum, the gamut. You have some black folk who are conservative, and some of them are gonna vote for Donald Trump, and then you have some black folk who are gonna vote for Hillary Clinton, and some black folk who are gonna vote for Jill Stein, and some black folk who ain't gonna vote, and some black folk who are who are genuinely on the left and progressive in a recognizable way, not just in this neoliberal kind of appropriation of the term. And so, if we have that kind of variety, that kind of difference, political difference in our communities, we have to do politics. We have to build solidarities, right, around particular issues so that we can hold one another accountable and we can organize on behalf of interests that disproportionately impact the communities of concern. And we understand that some people are going to be on our side and some people aren't going to be on our side. So I say all that to say is that, I've grown tired, especially over these last 8 years, of people appealing to this idea of black politics, appealing to this idea of blackness on behalf of protecting, right, what I take to be a neoliberal president, right? President Obama's politics, irrespective of his color, right, are decidedly neoliberal. And then when he speaks when he spoke at the commencement at Howard and then now at Rutgers, he has a very limited understanding. He's putting forward a very limited understanding of what constitutes politics, right? So I say all that to say is that we have to reclaim our story. We have to show when the story is being deployed to protect a certain kind of black liberalism. We have to I think we have to reassert the power and vitality of a black radical imagination, a black radical tradition, and begin to talk about the most vulnerable, the folks who are on the margins of this society, and put forward a substantive critique, right, of this easy and dangerous and insidious kind of racial liberalism that's doing all this kind of work today to keep black folk in check, to discipline our political imaginations. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It really makes so much sense because but it's a difficult task, right? Because we as black people, I always say it, it's hard to critique President Obama. Not in the sense that it's difficult, but it's hard because of the people around you who never want to look soberly at President Obama's achievements and the lack thereof, particularly as it pertains to the black community and into pertains to his politics overall. It's difficult because we have this vested, almost this vested interest to always protect him. And that's something that I wanted to ask you. I'm sober about President Obama. I understood who he was when he came into office because I actually, I read his book and I read his words and I listened to him speak, and I understood when he came in exactly he was going to be triangulation on steroids, because he kind of made it clear that that's what he wanted to do. But the question I want to ask you is, seeing that his politics and his policies really protect a system that's detrimental to African Americans, do you feel that we have bought into that paradigm of neoliberal economics and this militaristic voyeurism that we have overseas? Have we as black people and some white progressives bought into this paradigm for the sake of protecting President Obama from criticism?
Some folks have. I think some folks have lost their critical voices because they recognize that he's the most threatened president in the history of the country. The vitriol of the right. We have seen and witnessed over these 8 years a kind of nastiness on the part of the conservative wing of the country that would warrant us wanting to protect him and circle the wagons. But at the same time, in terms of policy, we just need to be clear. President Obama is just simply a DLC Democrat, right? Rockefeller, Eisenhower, Republican. This is what how Bill Clinton described himself, right? And I think this is what Thomas Frank has been, as he argues in his latest book, Listen Liberal, right? That in some ways that the Democratic Party, the party that was supposed to be the party to represent everyday, ordinary working people, has in some ways, well, it's not in some ways, has been captured by corporate interest and a certain kind of intellectual elite, such that they are the arbiters, the defenders, right, of a certain kind of corporate ethos, a certain set of corporate interests. And President Obama didn't run against that. He is that. And so part of what I'm saying is that, Malcolm X used to say we needed to be politically mature. And political maturity entails an understanding that just because you have black faces in high places, it doesn't mean you have progressive politics.
Right.
And I say this not as someone who has any animus directed toward President Obama or all the folks who are getting their invitations to the White House and all the folks who love and support the idea, who are really celebratory of the symbolism of President Obama. But what I believe, and I write this in the book, Benjamin, is that all of these Democratic presidents, whether it's Obama, whether it's Clinton, or whether it's Jimmy Carter, all of them are Melvillian confidence men, selling the snake oil of hope and change, that they never really fundamentally challenged the frame, right, of American politics. And so we have to do something dramatic, not put our faith in the Democratic Party, not put our faith in politics as usual or in some messiah figure, but to really understand our power individually as communities organized, right, on behalf of the most vulnerable, pressing and pushing for a much more progressive and radical politics. Does that make sense?